Hello, everybody. This is Theo Cedar Jones, and I'm here to ask a question. Where is the true left? Is there a true left? In light of current events, where what we've been told is the left, the Democratic Party, has shown itself to be the most buffoonish, unpatriotic, and repugnant group of individuals perhaps ever in history. The conservative movement under Trump in the United States, the patriotic and Make America Great movements in this country and other countries, seems to indicate a kind of sweeping victory for conservatism, for the right. Does it make any of you, especially erstwhile leftists, you still surviving leftists out there, do you ever wonder what has become of the left? Is there anything left of it that is worth retrieving or reclaiming? Or is the left in its present form a complete, debauched, falsified, and hideous mockery? The Democratic Party is not and has never represented what I call the true left. So I'm going to try to tell you what I think the true left is and what happened to it. The true left is not a political party. It has no central organization or hierarchical structure or a single leader. It is not based on a particular document or ideology. The true left is more like a way of life that excels at fostering cultural innovation and the expansion of human potential, but which takes many and disparate forms. The principal forms of the true left I will explore are the hippies, the Black Panthers, the rock bands, the acid takers, and the anti-war movement. These are some of the incipient forms of the true left as I define it. I will make a case that these seemingly divergent and disparate movements actually had the necessary components to coalesce into a universal movement of humanity that is spontaneously initiated and self-managed, independent of all the extant controlling hierarchies. As such, each of these parts of the true left are existentially threatening to the ancient bloodline families and their long-sought globalist agenda of depopulation, mass enslavement, and the harvesting and blood sacrifice of the human race. Each of these parts of the true left were treated in the most evil possible ways by the cabal and its agents. I just want to repeat that previous paragraph. As such, each of these parts of the true left were existentially threatening to the ancient bloodline families and their long-sought globalist agenda of depopulation, mass enslavement, and the harvesting and blood sacrifice of the human race. Each of these parts of the true left were treated in the most evil possible ways by the cabal and its agents. And this explains how the fake left of godless communism and a fascist world tyranny interposed itself into the hearts and minds of so many left-leaning people. Every instrument of terror and mind control was used against parts of the true left in order to scare the people away from joining them. The Democratic Party has presented itself as the only political channel left for those on the left, and for too many people on the left, and far too many people on the left have bought the lie and sold themselves out to this party of traitors. To understand the forces at work in suppressing the true left, I need to paint a picture of harm, of a social atmosphere of menace that is truly all-pervasive. that can only be explained by an organized satanic motivation to convert the totality of human life into an occasion of blood sacrifice on a global industrial scale. Let me give you some examples. Now, for years and decades, my entire life, there's been an uproar over gun violence in the United States and this constant back and forth about, gotta do something about the guns, gotta control the guns. And I'm a nonviolent guy, and I've never owned a gun, and I've disavowed the use and ownership of them for my own purposes and reasons. However, the arguments against guns in the United States are specious, and I'm going to give you some examples. In 2017, the estimated number of murders in the United States was 17,284. Most of those are handguns. 17,000, just use that number in your mind for a second. 17,000 human beings murdered in the United States in 1 year. 17,000 people dead. Now, the number of people killed in automobile accidents in 1 year, at the same year, is 40,100 people. 40,000 versus 17,000. So that's over twice the number of people who die from violence and guns die from automobile accidents. But there's more. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention says that more than 72,000 people in the United States are predicted to have died from drug overdoses in 2017. Most of those prescription, opiate, and other prescription drugs. So that's 72,000, which is over 3 times the amount of people killed by guns and violence. Now, to put it even in further perspective, China has 261,367 auto fatalities in 2013. Over 250,000 people killed in China every year from car accidents. That's 250 million. That's 250,000 people a year. The world total auto fatalities per year is 1,250,000 people killed by automobiles every year, year in, year out. And in addition to that, 36 million people die of hunger every year. Now, finally, the number of people killed in war deaths in 2017 was only 100,000. Now, the hue and cry about gun violence and the concern about warfare, of course, very justified, far outweigh and eclipse any kind of sweeping social concern about motor vehicle deaths. But we are all under a case of mind control, where we can look at the amount of deaths caused by medical errors, which number in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. The number of people who die every year from the prescribed use of pharmaceutical drugs, which is another 100,000 people. If you put this all together, it paints a picture not just of industrial mayhem and accidents and, oh gosh, it's just how things are, and we just, it's a risky world. Accidents happen, and there's just a lot of risk in life. No, this is engineered disaster on an industrial scale to feed their dark, demonic, satanic, blood sacrifice, ritualistic needs. Only a culture of secret societies based on blood sacrifice and with the means and capability to execute humanity on an industrial scale could account for these statistics. We are in an engineered disaster when it comes to the medical, the transit and car industry. Obviously, there's something going on here, but this is the environment in which the true left has had to exist. The most threatening, the most evil, and the most despotic attempts to suppress every flower of human consciousness, every spark of human positive potentiality. And that's what the true left embodies. So, just to finish off this harm picture, when you are in your city and you see a car coming at you, just remember, twice as many people die from cars as guns in the United States. So each of those cars that you see on the street is the equivalent of 2 loaded handguns pointed at you. And we've built our cities to accommodate these overweighted, toxic, catastrophic vehicles, which could, in 90% of the cases, be replaced by light electric vehicles. But yet, we make these into multi-ton lethal weapons with overly heavy engines and complicated working parts just to create a non-stop slow-motion disaster for the entire human race. That we're under this constant threat. We're in an atmosphere of menace that is engineered mind control by the satanic globalist cabal. That is the atmosphere in which the true left has been operating, has tried to exist, has tried to function, has tried to grow and adapt. So, how were the hippies and other parts of the true left suppressed? Well, first off, who were the chief hippies? Who were the top leaders of the hippie movement? Mostly, they were rock musicians and rock stars and rock bands, as well as artists and writers. Plus an individual who was the greatest leader of communalism or the cooperative community movement, Stephen Gaskin. Most people haven't heard of him. He was one of the few movement leaders who was not assassinated. But in any case, most people have never heard of him. Here's, we're just going to go down this litany. Fred Hampton, who was the up-and-coming, bright, shiny leader and star of the Black Panther Party movement in 1969 in Chicago. Fred Hampton was drugged and shot point blank in the head twice in his sleep. Fred Hampton coined the term Rainbow Coalition. I'm going to check the recording. We're good. Fred Hampton coined the term Rainbow Coalition and had brought together different racial groups in urban Chicago. It was only about 6 months between his coining of the term Rainbow Coalition and his death. Clearly, there was something very threatening about a young leader who was so eloquent and who had this unique capability to bridge the chasm of racial division between different street gangs, different ethnic groups of all kinds, whether it was dispossessed whites, Latinos, Native Americans, or blacks. Fred Hampton showed every sign of being able to unite everyone on the true left. He could unite the hippies with the acid takers, with the anti-war movement, with the Black Panthers, and with all the dispossessed white people. Clearly that was a threat. Clearly. Now, in Chicago, you have Fred Hampton with the Rainbow Movement. In Oakland, you have Huey P. Newton, who was busy working on community development projects, feeding children breakfast, creating the Oakland Community School, and developing the idea of intercommunalism, which was a parallel idea to the Rainbow Coalition, where all the disparate groups and interests could come together along common interest lines. along lines of commonality. Now, Huey P. Newton also was assassinated, and he was shot. He was jailed. He was harassed and threatened in every way a human being can be. And that is the kind of treatment that our best and brightest on the true left had to undergo. I'm not saying that Huey P. Newton was a perfect person. I'm saying that even in the Black Panther movement itself, ideas of community development and intercommunalism were not, or the Rainbow Coalition were not particularly well received by those who were in favor of a partition between everybody, the Black nationalist movement and the separatist movements that had achieved ascendancy, perhaps, in the Black Panther Party, and therefore were, in a sense, doing the bidding of the divide and conquer strategy of the cabal. I don't believe that Black nationalism is the be-all, end-all answer for the Black Panthers, and that the Rainbow Coalition, intercommunalism, and community development are the answer. But even on the left, even on inside the Black Panther Party, ideas of community development are underserved, are marginalized. And even the idea of cooperative community just doesn't necessarily ring a bell politically with people as being the rallying cry for what the true left is or should be. But Fred Hampton and Huey P. Newton made concrete efforts and accomplishments and achievements in the direction of cooperative community being applied at any scale of society, any scale, including all 7.6 billion people. The incipient cooperative universalism of the Panthers and the hippies and the rock and roll bands was a clear and present danger to the divide and conquer strategy of the cabal. The hippies were dispersed and discredited through assassination and sex paranoia and hypocritical Puritanism. Let's take some example of how the true left was treated in the hippie quadrant. There was a time in the late 60s and early 70s in which a man named Timothy Leary was considered public enemy number one by the President Richard Nixon and the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover and the entire police state apparatus of the United States fell on the head of this man because he had the temerity to introduce certain ideas to the youth, such as tune in, turn on, and drop out, and set and setting, meaning when you take acid, you need to manage and take responsibility for your mental set and your environmental setting. Now, just those two ideas, tune in, turn on, and drop out, which is to say, take responsibility for expanding your own consciousness through responsible use of psychedelic drugs. Find your own inner power and understanding through that direct empirical experience. And then make a willful, sovereign decision to not cooperate with the Matrix anymore. It's a beautiful thing. Timothy Leary was right. He was much more right than he was wrong. And he did a lot more good than he did bad. And he was treated as public enemy number one. And they put him in jail for 2 roaches of marijuana, mind you. And had cases stacked up against him to keep him in jail and out of circulation for the rest of his life over nothing, over bullshit. And that sends a message to every other tripper, every other sensitive spirit that wants to open up their psyche to the mystery through the use of psychedelic drugs. That if you open yourself up like that, you could end up like Timothy Leary. And yet, all the brave trippers, including myself, went into that void and venture of psychedelic drug use responsibly, in spite of this ultimate campaign of terror. So, a person advocating consciousness expansion through responsible use of psychedelic drugs to the youth has the maximum hate and terror instruments of the state apparatus brought onto his head. Example number 1. The hippies had the temerity also, in addition to extolling the virtues of consciousness expansion through responsible use of psychedelic drugs, or even occasionally reckless use of psychedelic drugs, the consenting right of humans to their free sexuality, free love. Not just debauched, self-interested, pleasure-seeking at the most low vibrational consumeristic level, which is how they try to paint the free love revolution of the hippies, but an honest exploration of your human sexual potential and sovereign rights of free human sexual expression. This is so threatening to the power structure of the cabal, because they're based on secret societies which are based on the perversion, the subversion, and the mind control and torture of humans in their sexuality. Sexuality is the principal means of social control by the secret societies. And for the hippies, in their Promethean boldness to steal the fire of sexual human freedom back from these secret societies, unacceptable. The hippies' assertion of free love was met with genocidal biowarfare in the form of the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, Robert Gallo, and these other pernicious traitors creating AIDS in the laboratory and injecting it into human populations through the hepatitis B vaccine in New York City and Africa and other places. And then blaming the gays and blaming the hippies for AIDS, saying, oh, this was the result of the libertine and permissive practices and attitudes of these dirty, filthy faggots and hippies. They are to blame. And therefore, AIDS became the perfect way to demonize this thrust towards human sexual freedom. The hippies were reclaiming human sexuality and therefore stealing it back from its misuse by secret societies for the purpose of blackmail and mind control and ultimately social control. The Manson murders were orchestrated in such a way as to make it appear as though the Black Panthers had done the murders, in order to foment a race war, as well as to make the hippies look like homicidal psychopaths. All of this vastly orchestrated mind control, psyops, torture, rape, murder, blackmail. That's the social atmosphere in which the true left has had to survive. And the rest of everybody else too. The hippies and the anti-war movement were the first time a popular movement had stopped a war created by the cabal. Hello everybody. We're back on the topic of the true left. So, where we left off, the hippies and the anti-war movement were the first time a popular movement had stopped a war created by the cabal. The Rainbow Movement of the Fred Hampton faction of the Black Panther People's Party and the Community Development and Intercommunalism model of the Huey P. Newton faction of the Black Panther People's Party were universally applicable and infinitely scalable social models that would inevitably have brought together the Black Panthers with the acid takers, the rock and roll bands, the hippies, and the anti-war movement, the convergence of these movements would spell the end of the cabal. The destruction of the hippie movement was an attempt to prevent the reunion and reconciliation between Pan and Christ. The peace and love hippie icon, Christ, combined with the free love hippie icon, Pan, equals a perfect equation between hippie as Pan and hippie as Christ. For the cabal and their mind control priesthood, Christ must always remain dead, safely dead, and Pan must always remain demonized as a false image of Satan. Never the twain shall meet. But the hippie movement assuredly does represent the happy reconciliation of Pan and Christ. And through this happy reconciliation, Pan regains his heart, and Christ regains his sexuality. This was briefly embodied by the Beatles before Paul's death. It was also embodied again briefly by Sly and the Family Stone and the Fifth Dimension. All of these bands had an element of the heart and sexuality being reconciled and in harmony. So, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, tempered by the moral presence and loving force of God, constitute the soil of the true left, and are a natural replacement for the religious military-industrial complex. We can reclaim Pan from any satanic associations simply by removing all instances of rape, secrecy, and blood sacrifice from our civilization. Peace, free love, and flower power are the answer to rape and war and blood sacrifice. The true left is not a political party or communistic political ideology, but a way of life. It is universally loving and cooperative, like a new Tartaria. The true left creates social cohesion through pleasure bonding, whereas the right generates social unity through shared security duties. The true left creates the body politic by facilitating sexual attraction and the hooking up of fertile humans. The right protects the body politic by handling security duties on its behalf. The true left is responsible for cultural innovation and the creation of new humans. And the right is obligated to preserve everybody's security and safety, as well as preserve the integrity of our Constitution, our rule of law, our traditions, and democratic institutions. The hippies and the rock and roll movements The hippies and the rock and roll movements reconcile the Abrahamic religions with the fertility cults and the nature religions, defeating another aspect of the divide and conquer strategy of the cabal. So the true left is not going to take over through conventional means of political force and centralized hierarchical organization. The true left is going to naturally bypass and replace the old civilization through cultural diffusion. The true left is the reemergence of goddess-positive culture and the reemergence of a culture of balance between the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine. The true left is the emergence of a prior unity-based horizontal human culture of everybody all at once. The Black Panthers were right insofar as the new civilization will make sure that every child receives a healthy breakfast and a good education. The Black Panthers were also right insofar as community development and intercommunalism is the universal obligation and opportunity of all people, and means that literally all people can cooperate fruitfully together. The anti-war movement was right, period. The new civilization will not have constant warfare, or any warfare, except as a last resort in self-defense. And the hippies were right, insofar as humans have a right to freedom of sexuality, self-expression, and consciousness expansion through drugs and other means. So, the true left is the convergence and the spontaneous cooperation between the community development model of the Black Panthers, the ecstatic participatory culture of rock and roll, the free love, peace, anti-war movements of the hippies, and the consciousness expansion of the acid takers into a cohesive new model that will support basically the Global Cooperative Forum, sustainable bionomies, eco-village type of living, cooperative community type of living on a global scale.